Were you raised with harsh parenting techniques? Do you still rely on the same harsh parenting style you were raised with when parenting your own kids, but find that you're not connecting with your kids or getting the results you want? If you're ready to try something different, my guest will share some tips you can begin using right away in just a moment, so don't go anywhere.
Welcome to the Fatherhood Challenge, a movement to awaken and inspire fathers everywhere to take great pride in their role and to challenge society to understand how important fathers are to the stability and culture of their family's environment. Now, here's your host, Jonathan Guerrero.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. My guest is Bryan Saint-Louis, a youth inspirational specialist and speaker with over a decade of experience in driving positive outcomes in education and parenting. And now I brought his expertise on the program to help dads listening now. Bryan, thank you so much for being on the Fatherhood Challenge.
Jonathan, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's an honor. Thank you so much.
Bryan, what is your favorite dad joke?
Man, so I heard this one and I actually like this one a lot. So someone comes to the dad and says, "Hey, Dad, Sunday was a sad day." And then he says, "But yesterday was a Saturday." Okay, all right, good. We got it. We got it. All right, as long as we got to laugh, man. That's all I need.
It got me.
All right, man. I hope the listeners got a little laugh out of that one too, man. That's awesome.
I'm sure they did. That was awesome.
Oh, man.
Well, Bryan, let's start with your story. How did you get involved with working with youth and helping parents connect with their kids?
I was 20 years old. I used to work in as a not speaker necessarily at that time, right? But 20, I was working as a Bible teacher. And I remembered I was in Boston at the time, and there was a group of kids. I want to say about 70 kids. And it was 3 of us. And we were supposed to be basically helping them out for the whole month that this series was happening. And we were supposed to be teaching them the Bible. Ultimately, the 2 other guys kind of stepped off and found myself being the one having to take care of a room of 70 kids between the ages of 13 to 17.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And of course, I had some people who would come in and help out and such, but for the most part, the brunt of that focus was on me. But man, when I tell you, I was so impressed with these kids being able to answer certain questions that I had. But then I also realized that I was very keen on connecting very well with this age group, because I wasn't so old. I'm only 20, even though they said I was old, but I was only 20 at the time, and so I wasn't so far away from being a teenager. And I remembered what it felt like to be a teen, trying to understand certain concepts, and also feeling like a lot of what was being taught had no relativity to me. And so I was very specific and intentional on the questions that I was asking these kids. Ended up being such a powerful time that brought me and led me to continue to do work with youth. When I was 21, I started working at a youth juvenile detention facility, just seeing the power of how radical empathy was able to make me help build stronger relationships with these youth, but also impacting their lives when they get out of that juvenile detention facility. Being in that space at such a young age helped me to see how powerful youth really are, and understanding how much they need strong supports in their lives. Because a lot of them, sometimes we see kids who are acting crazy. We see kids who, speak out, or they're disrespectful and such. And I always ask myself the question, who taught them? What was it that happened in their background or their life that got them to the place that they were? And ultimately, I'm not responsible for who they are before they meet me. But because of the connection that I am right now with them, now I'm responsible of modeling the proper behavior that they can now choose to use in their future. And so this is something that I started when it was about 2021, and just seeing the power of how youth need that strong mentor, and youth need that one caring adult, has pushed me to want to continue in the work with youth as well. But then, as you said, right, as I got older, I became a dad. I'm realizing how powerful it is for these children to have strong figures in the home. And so now, as I'm also working with youth, my main focus as well is also uplifting and supporting the adults in the lives of youth so that they can also know how to properly connect with those teens and the children in their lives as well.
The next question could be a tough one,
Yeah.
but definitely an important one. Harsh parenting has been a reality for many generations and is argued to be effective.
Mhm.
This includes everything from yelling to even corporal punishment. In fact, some say that we have crime rates because parents are often too soft on their kids. I'll give you one example I saw. There was a post by a very popular pop star
Mhm.
bragging about the fact that she actually uses corporal punishment on her kids. And I believe she's either a Gen Xer or a millennial.
Mhm.
And I looked in the comments, and the comments were flooded with mostly baby boomers who were jumping in there and congratulating her. So I'm curious, if this rule, this idea that harsh parenting is effective and we don't have enough of it, and that's why kids are going wrong these days. Is this true, or is this a lie?
I don't think that's true. We have seen high rates of criminality throughout the years since the 80s, since the 90s. And corporal punishment was absolutely a major use in parenting at that time. So it's not as though because of corporal punishment, it made for better conditions. A lot of youth were treated that way, right? They had corporal punishment used, and yet crime rates uh, have not necessarily lowered or were lower back then than they are today. I think there's a lot of more different factors that deal with why the youth are still necessarily being connected or getting involved with criminality, especially with the rise of social media. They're being influenced in a major way, which I think can also contribute to what they want to do or how they're connected to other people around them. But it's not necessarily for corporal punishment. And in fact, I mean, when you look at the question, right, for the fact that people argue its effectiveness, and I know a lot of people want to say mental health has also risen in these years, but in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, how many people were actually going to counseling due to their mental health? We weren't necessarily seeing a lot of individuals who were connecting to psychologists, to therapists, because it was such a taboo concern, and individuals were not necessarily trying to see what was going on introspectively in their minds. And so many of them, the statistics show that mental health is on the rise right now. But if we were actually doing the right work to better ourselves, to connect ourselves with mental health professionals when we were dealing with traumatic events, we would have seen the same level of mental health back then as well. And I know people, for instance, Jonathan, I know people love to say, well, it worked for me and look how I turned out. But I always ask the question, if you go back to that child that you were, don't think about the child or the adult that you are today. I'm not talking about the adult that you are today. I'm talking about that inner child that you were. What was it that your inner child needed? Now that you're an adult and you can see things in a better perspective, what was it that your inner child needed? Did they need all of that punishment? Did they need all of that yelling? Even if it happened once or twice, did they need it happening 10 times a week or 10 times a day? Right? Like a lot of times we sometimes look at the perspective of who we are today, but we don't look back at who that inner child was and what they probably needed better in order for them to live a better life, not just focusing on the impact that it has on our today, but realizing that child probably needed a little bit more love. And if we looked at it that way, maybe we would have a different perspective as well.
I can weigh on this too a little bit from a slightly different perspective. A lot of these arguments tend to reside in, especially in conservative religious
Yep.
organizations and
Yep.
denominations. This is where we really tend to see that argument stick. And I can tell you from my observation that a lot of those same adults that are arguing, that have that argument, that say, look how I turned out, and they did the same thing to their kids that was done to them. I can tell you that in churches that have tried to grow youth programs, a lot of times the biggest people, the most of the people who stand in the way in the growth of youth programs and youth fellowship programs in a church are often those same adults.
100%.
They are often the ones who are oppositional to youth programs and youth initiatives. They're in opposition to youth leadership and youth growth. And you see more hostility in their interactions with other youth. That's been my observation.
I can give you a quick example on that. I remember one time, because I used to be a youth pastor, right? And I remember there was a time where they blamed the youth for like I was in a board meeting, blamed the youth for the mess that was in the church, for the wires that were messed up in the audio upstairs. And I was sitting back and I was a little bit confused because I was asking myself the question, is that even true? And I remembered as they were naming some of the things that were happening, somebody said, "Oh no, that wasn't Pastor Bryan and them. That was somebody else. That was another group." And then what they said, "Well, what about the audio equipment in the tech room?" Somebody raised their hand. "Oh no, that wasn't the youth. That was X, Y, and Z." I couldn't remember exactly who it was. And I just looked at them and I said, "You realize how you're quick to attack the youth on what's happening here." I said, and you blame the youth on things that they didn't even do in the first place. The perspective was the youth caused problems. And that's the philosophy that causes a lot of issues that I see, like you said, in churches and many different organizations as well. If they have a philosophical view on how they see youth, they will never be able to actually see them as the empowering leaders that they are right now, and they could be even better.
Also, from a biblical perspective, the biggest argument that's used for enforcing corporal punishment on youth is the scripture text, "Spare the rod, spoil the child."
Yeah, I love that one.
And and what's interesting about that one is the rod, the Hebrew word that's used for rod is the exact same word that's used for a scepter. A scepter that a king or a queen would use. And what's the purpose of a scepter? Of a royal scepter? What is the purpose of it?
I mean, isn't that the scepter to basically like crown or show the royalty of the individual in that sense?
Yeah, it's a symbol of leadership.
Right.
It's a symbol of authority. So when someone approaches the throne, the king the king or queen isn't hitting anyone with the scepter. And so what's really being said there is, dads, step up and be a parent, be a dad.
And I can even add to that, right? Because Solomon's father was who? David. And what did David say about the rod?
It's a comfort.
Exactly. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Why would, if the rod was meant to beat and to destroy and to demean, how is that a comforting tool? And so Solomon,
it's not. It's a source of anxiety, and it's a source of trauma.
Exactly. And so I love that you brought that up. Not a lot of people talk about the rod in that sense, and so I love that you brought that analogy and understanding of how the rod is really supposed to be. Like you said, the symbol of authority. That's amazing.
One of the biggest arguments I hear for why dads yell at their kids is because it gets their attention, and it's the only way that they will listen. What are some other options dads have that would get better results?
Man, that's a really good question, Jonathan. And as a father myself, I would say that one of the things that have helped me to connect more with my children is not the loud yelling dad voice. but it's the presence. It's just a strong presence with that child. That child feels safe with me. And I even tell him that. I talk to him and I tell him, hey, listen, if you listen to me, I will guide you to places that you will grow much better than me in your life. And he's only 4 years old. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And I'm very keen on making sure that they understand how safe they are around me. Because and I'll be honest, growing up, I used to be afraid of my dad. Me and my dad right now have a very amazing relationship, and that took time to build. But I used to be afraid of my father, and and so it wasn't very this strong loving connection that I had. It was more so on a fear base. As I grew older, I understood certain aspects. I also understood how he grew up and why things, are the way that they are. But that doesn't mean that I have to do what was done to me in a certain sense. And so when I speak to my kids, and let's I'm not going to be a liar here as well as to say I've never yelled. But when I yell, I'm quick to apologize. I'm quick to tell them, hey, look, daddy used a yelling voice that I didn't need to use in this moment at all. Right? This wasn't urgent where you were crossing the street or something was happening to you. Right? I made a mistake in yelling at you right now. And then I start breaking down why is it that I did that in the first place, and then what did we need to do in the situation? How could we do this better? And I tell you, as sometimes we think we can't converse with our kids, these kids are so smart and they take up a lot of information. I just spoke to my child this morning and I told him, I said, Levi, I need you to come downstairs. And then he says, okay, Dad. He didn't come downstairs. I didn't yell. But what I did, I switched up the question. I said, hey, Levi, what did I ask you to do? Right? I didn't say, come downstairs again, and then now that aggravates me. I told him, what did I ask you to do? And then he says, oh, you asked me to come downstairs. I said, okay, can you do that now? And then boom, he just walks right downstairs. A lot of the times.
Interesting.
Yeah, no. A lot of the times, man, if we actually just converse deeper with our children, and so one of the techniques that I've learned is don't repeat your question twice. Ask when you give your question to your child, like, hey, can you go clean that up? And they'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll clean it up. Let's say they don't do it. The next question should be, because now you're giving yourself a sense of authority and power as well while you're asking this question, but you also don't have to be yelling and reverting to anger and aggression. You just ask the question, hey, what did I ask you to do? And so now instead of them having to be abrasive and such back and building that type of connection, it just thinks to themselves, oh shoot, he asked me to do this. And then, all right, yeah, let's get to it. It's simple techniques, but these are things that have to be done from early on, right? We're not expecting children to be adults, and I think that's one of the problems that we have as parents and as fathers. We expect them to be at a higher level of regulation than we are, or maybe not higher than us, but we expect them to be a higher level than we think they are supposed to be. The people who need to regulate their emotions and know how to speak to them is always the adult. We're modeling the behavior that needs to be shown. And so when that child comes to us, we are able and should be capable to show them the way to move in that light. And so now they can see how to speak, how to understand, how to act in certain situations. So it makes it a lot better now when we're speaking with assertiveness, not aggression, right? Assertiveness, and when we have to lay down a specific, I wouldn't say tone, but this is what needs to be done in the home right now. It's still done in a way that the child is still loved, cared for, and communicated properly with. But that's my perspective. That's what I've seen has worked, and a lot of the people who I've learned from, because again, I had mentors growing up. And when those mentors showed me how they speak to their children, it allowed me the opportunity to say, I want to go a different route when I have children, to speak to them and to raise them a certain way that's modeled better as well.
Let's talk about bonding. How early does the bonding process start, and how can dads create and maintain a strong bond with their sons or daughters?
Yeah, I love that question. When I think about bonding, that's something that happens since day one, right? And somebody gave me some really good advice when I had my first child that I could raise. When I felt, I felt a bit confused because the child was always wanting to be around mother, because at the end of the day she was breastfeeding, and so I found it kind of difficult. How do I bond with the kid, or what am I supposed to do? And I found those moments where I would just be around both of them, just sitting, just connecting. Somebody told me this very specific thing. They said, when you take care of the mother, you're taking care of the child. And one of the things that I found myself doing and learning early on was, the better I take care of my wife, that child will also be taken care of, supported, and bonded with. But then I also needed my own time. I needed time to bond with my child. I needed time to connect with my kid. And one of the things that, and I'll just be really transparent with this, this was 2020, so the height of COVID, and my child was only about 1 year old at the time, but I was playing a lot of video games. And I realized, I asked myself the question, I said, man, I'm playing more time or spending more time gaming than I am spending with my child, because nothing was going on. There was a lot of confusion. Everyone was just home. So I needed something to do. And I found myself, the something to do was to game instead of just sitting there and chilling and just looking at my kid, just making funny faces and reading or whatever the case may be. Now, I'm not saying everybody has to do this, but I I threw away my games. I threw away I sold my computer and I threw away the rest of the games that I had, because I asked myself the question. I said, do I care more about this than I care about my child? And I wanted to be a lot more present and connected with my kid, and which allowed that very thing, right? I deepened my connection with my child, making some radical decisions that were helpful to our relationship. And 4 years later, he's almost 5. Man, when I tell you my kid loves me, I love my child. We're so connected with everything that we're doing. It's because I made some decisions that allowed us to build a stronger connection instead of waiting years later. I don't need to wait until that child is 6 or 7 and throwing a baseball, or can play basketball, or can do extracurricular activities, or is good at something that I like, in order for me to bond with them. I just need to connect and just sit and converse and read and just build that bond. And I think that once we start doing that more often, these will deepen our connections with our children. And no matter what they do, they'll love the connection that we spend time with. It doesn't matter what we do, it's just the fact that we're spending the time together.
What can dads do if they've made mistakes in the beginning and they don't know where to begin creating a bond and connecting with their kids later in that journey?
I mean, first thing, man, just forgive yourself, number one, because we don't need to hold on to that baggage, right? We all make mistakes. And so forgive yourself and move forward with that, right? Because at the end of the day, if you show me anybody who says that they're a perfect father, they're just a liar. At the end of the day, like
That's true.
like let's just be real. We make mistakes. Let's understand that. Let's forgive ourselves and let's move forward. That's number one. And then number two, when as we're taking those steps, let's really understand that child, right? And one of the things that what I mean by that is, don't just look at the fact that there are certain things that you love and care for, and try to understand what they truly love and care for too, and bond with them in those aspects in their lives. So it's not just the things that you love and now you're projecting your life on them, but you're able to now have this communication or this sharing bond where you both can show what each other love and care for, and ultimately that child sees, man, my dad cares about this too in my life. So I think that's very important as well.
How can dads connect with you or learn more about what you're doing?
A lot of the work that I'm doing right now is more so centered around youth development and empowerment and understanding how to truly build up the next generation. And so my work is done a lot in schools, and I do a lot of conferences as well, where I speak to fathers, where I speak about mental health, where I speak about youth development and empowerment. I do a lot of work with schools and with classroom presentation. I know a lot of dads might not be in that, but I do community work as well. And so what that means is we're looking to bond parents with educators so that they build a stronger connection to their schools. So that's one of the things that I think is very missed right now, is the education to parent ratio. And to even go a little bit deeper, I don't see, as being an educator, we see a lot of women in education, but we don't see a lot of fathers or dads or men in education as much as we used to. And so one of the missions that I'm looking to do is really start pushing men back into the schools, because it helps those kids to be able to see their fathers as leaders as well, to care about their education in that sense. And so that's a big mission of mine. But you could easily find me either at bslspeaks.com. You could even book me to come to different places that you would like for me to come speak at. And then also my Instagram is BSL_speaks as well.
And just to make this easier, if you go to thefatherhoodchallenge.com, that's thefatherhoodchallenge.com. If you go to this episode, look right below the episode description, and I'll have all of the links that Bryan just mentioned. I'll have it posted there for your convenience. Bryan, as we close, what is your challenge to dads listening now?
My challenge is, it's not about doing something specific. My challenge would be to challenge your thinking, challenge the way that you view your relationship with your child. I want you to challenge even the way that your child sees you. Think about how does your child see you as a father? And I want us to really just start thinking how we can deepen our connection with our kids. I believe in this concept of empathy, and radical empathy even more, the action that it takes. And empathy allows us to try to understand and to imagine the feelings that that child is doing or feeling at that moment. And so I want us to try to challenge ourselves to think more empathetically, to think about how that child is seeing their situation and how we can better be fathers, be dads, be pouring into our children in a certain specific way. And so with that challenge, I know that our perspectives will deepen and be able to connect deeper with our child as well.
Bryan, it's been an absolute honor to have you on the Fatherhood Challenge. You've given us tremendous wisdom and actionable steps that any dad can do today, to do right now and get results. And I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you again for having me. I really appreciate it, Jonathan. I'm looking forward to hearing and to seeing the impact that our fathers can take from this. So thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fatherhood Challenge. If you would like to contact us, listen to other episodes, find any resource mentioned in this program, or find out more information about the Fatherhood Challenge, please visit thefatherhoodchallenge.com. That's thefatherhoodchallenge.com.
I'd like to pause and thank our proud sponsor of the Fatherhood Challenge, Zencastr. If you've thought about podcasting before and realized that you need a lot of different tools and services, those days are over. With Zencastr's all-in-one podcast production platform, you can create your podcast all in one place and distribute to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations. But the reason I personally use and trust them with the production of this syndicated radio program is their professional broadcast quality sound. There is no better time than now to start your podcast using Zencastr for all your needs. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code FATHERHOOD, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencastr paid plan. I want you to have the same easy experiences I do for all my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story.